Good morning on this second day of January. It was on this day in 2005 at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon that my service of ordination began at Trinity in Carrington. Merle and Dorothy Bauer were the lay people representatives that presented me for that. And it was a stormy day, but it happened. So here I am. By no means was that the beginning of my time of preaching and leading worship, but I guess that's what kind of made me official as a pastor. Have a request this morning just to pray for those who are having surgery today. And I have a special person I'm thinking about today as well. As we look at Genesis 4, 5, and 6 this morning, that's the daily Bible reading in the Old Testament, shown in the Bible Gateway program, or BibleGateway.com, which I follow. And it begins with, Adam and Eve, still just the two of them in some ways. Now the man knew his wife, and she conceived and bore a son. They had a sexual relationship, and she conceived and bore Cain. And she has produced a man with the help of God, she says. With the help of the Lord. So she realizes that God is at work in this miracle of birth. And then she had a second son named Abel. And it says Abel was a keeper of the sheep and Cain a tiller of the ground. And we're mostly aware of those two things. And these two sons, as they grew older, each came with an offering. Toward the Lord, an offering of the first fruit. And Abel brought an offering of the ground, and Cain of the ground, and Abel brought forth the firstlings of his flock. And Abel's offering was accepted by God, and Cain's wasn't. And there's no explanation for that. It's a puzzle as to why. I mean, but it ended up with the animosity between Cain and Abel. And Abel talked to God about it. It says, the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, you'll be accepted." But Cain heard that from God. And yet Cain invited his brother out to the field. And verse 8, Cain killed Abel. And, the first murder, the first sin had been Eve and Adam eating of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. And this, as far as we know, this is the first murder. And God knows what happened. And he comes to Cain and says, "Where is your brother Abel?" And Cain's response, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And it's a question that gets asked much today. With people who are on welfare, people that don't have the means, people that need a little bit of help. Am I my brother's keeper? And, we are to help, we are to share, we are to watch out and do what we can for our brothers and sisters. But it's an age-old question. Am I my brother's keeper? And we see that, Cain falls out of favor with God. And Cain says, as I go, because God basically banishes him from here. And he says, when you till the ground, it won't yield. And he said his punishment is too great. And Cain figures that someone now will kill him. And God says, whoever kills Cain will suffer a sevenfold vengeance. And, so it kind of puts a question in our mind. Adam and Eve had Cain and Abel. Who else would be there? Well, we're going to get an answer to that, I think, as we start on chapter 5. But Cain went away from the presence of the Lord, it says, and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. And there he took a wife. And she conceived and bore a son, Enoch. And we have then several of Cain's children listed as they are born. And they talk, of different things. And one of the sons, Lamech, said to his wife, I have killed a man for wounding me. And I mean, we don't have that information that I can see in here anyway. But, it tells a little bit of what some of them do. Like Jubal plays the lyre and the pipe. He's a musician. But in verse 25, Adam comes into Eve again. They have another sexual relationship, and she bears his son Seth, and of whom we know. And so here we've had this interlude of Cain and Abel growing old enough to have their own occupations, and then Abel for the murder, and Abel moving away and listing several sons before, boom, now maybe ever we a flashback. I don't know, with the timing of things, but she bore a son named Seth. And Eve says, God has appointed for me another child instead of Abel. And then to Seth, another son was born, Enosh. And it says, at that time, people began to invoke the name of the Lord. They began to praise God, to worship God, to give God thanks and honor. And I also kind of look at that word, they began to invoke the name of the Lord, to use it maybe improperly. I mean, it goes both ways, I think. Now, chapter 5, this is the list of the descendants of Adam. And then this next verse is important. When God created humankind, he made them in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them and blessed them and named them humankind when they were created. And I read into that, Adam and Eve were the first, but, he had to have created more than just Adam and Eve so that there would be a wife for Cain and that there would be other people in this land of Nod. And this is just my head work, and you may disagree with me, and that's just fine. But it's always, the question comes, if Adam and Eve didn't have any daughters, where did Cain find a wife? Well, I don't know. That's one way that I look at a possibility. And then we have when Adam lived 130 years old is when he had this son named Seth. So he was, and we think 130 years old is, way more than any of us are really expected to live. But the days of Adam after he became the father of Seth were 800 years. So therefore, Adam lived 930 years when he died. And as we read through the rest of chapter 5, Seth lived 105 years. He became a father, and he lived 912 years. And Enosh lived 905 years. And then we find Methuselah in verse 25, who lived 969 years. And so he is the longest lived person that's listed that way in the Bible. And so we have, people having children at quite an age. And verse 30, Lamech lived after the birth of Noah 595 years, had other sons and daughters. And then verse 32, after Noah was 500 years old, he had Ham, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And so these are the three of Noah's sons that go into the ark with him when he was 500 years old. And when we get into the New Testament or even later, Elizabeth and Zechariah were elderly, and others that were 90 years old. Moses and Adam and Abraham and Sarah, were 100 years old, 90 years old, and well past the age of giving birth. But here, 500 years old. In then chapter 6, people began to multiply, and daughters were born to them, and some of the heavenly beings were taking these humans for wives, that God was displeased. And then verse 5, God saw the wickedness of humankind, and every inclination in their hearts was evil. And the Lord was sorry that he had made humankind. He was sorry that he'd made humankind. This, as he had created back in chapter 1, after he had created humankind, it was very good. And now so quickly. I mean, it's quite a few years have passed, but he is disappointed. He is sorry that he created humankind. So he has Noah begin to build this ark. You know, verse 8 says, but Noah found favor in the sight of the God, and we have Noah's descendants, and God telling Noah to build the ark. That just, you know, seems like creation just happened. And all of a sudden, God is going to start over with Noah, Shem, Ham, Japheth, and their wives. Terrible destruction that came, but yet, you know, God saw the evil in the world. And because God saw the evil in the world some 2,000 years or 2,000 years ago, is why Jesus came, to separate us from that evil within us by granting forgiveness in Jesus Christ. So God found a way to take the evilness out of the world, most of it anyway at that point in time. And the flood is also a reminder for us that in the waters of baptism, we are made clean and holy in the sight of God.